History is written by the victors. It's a well-worn phrase, but it holds a profound and often brutal truth. The stories that survive, the narratives that become cemented in our collective memory, are those shaped by power. And when power seeks to justify itself, it often does so by silencing, discrediting, or destroying another. Today, we delve into one of history's most haunting and controversial figures, a woman whose name has become synonymous with insanity, a queen whose legacy was systematically dismantled by the very men sworn to protect her. This is the story of Joanna of Castile, better known to the world as Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. The image is a powerful one. A grief-stricken queen, clad in black, refusing to abandon the corpse of her beloved husband, dragging his coffin across the desolate plains of Spain, her mind shattered by sorrow. We hear whispers of her violent jealousy, of a queen who flew into a rage and supposedly slashed the face of a rival with a pair of scissors. It's a story of Gothic horror, of a royal mind unhinged. But what if that story, the one that has echoed through the centuries, is not the whole truth? What if it's a carefully constructed fiction, a piece of political propaganda so effective it has endured for 500 years? What if the woman we call mad was, in fact, a victim, a brilliant, passionate, and capable ruler who was systematically broken and imprisoned so that others could steal her crown? To understand Joanna, we must first understand the world that created her. She was born in 1479, a child of immense privilege and even greater pressure. Her parents were no ordinary monarchs. They were Isabella, I of Castile, and Ferdinand II of Aragon, the famed Catholic monarchs who unified Spain, completed the Reconquista, and funded the voyage of Christopher Columbus. They were titans of their age, shrewd, powerful, and deeply devout. Into this crucible of ambition and faith, Joanna was born the third child and second daughter. From an early age, she was noted for her intelligence. She was a gifted student, excelling in languages, music, and theology. She was fluent in Castilian, Catalan, French, and Latin. She was described as beautiful, with the fair hair and pale skin of her paternal grandmother. But there was also a shadow that seemed to follow her, a streak of melancholy and intense piety that set her apart from her siblings. This wasn't seen as madness, but as a deep, sensitive nature. Her parents' court was a center of power and culture, but it was also a political chessboard. Every marriage was a strategic alliance, every child a pawn in the grand game of European diplomacy. Joanna's destiny, like that of her siblings, was to be a bride of state. Her elder brother, John, was the heir. Her elder sister, Isabella, was married to the King of Portugal. And her younger sisters, Maria and Catherine, the future Catherine of Aragon, first wife of Henry VIII, would also be used to forge powerful alliances. For Joanna, her parents looked to the heart of Europe, to the rising power of the House of Habsburg. The match was made with Philip, Archduke of Austria, Duke of Burgundy, and son of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. He was known throughout the courts of Europe as Philip the Handsome, and the nickname was no exaggeration. He was charismatic, athletic, and by all accounts, breathtakingly good looking. For the 16-year-old Joanna, who had spent her life steeped in the somber piety of the Spanish court, the prospect must have been both terrifying and exhilarating. In 1496, she set sail for Flanders to meet her future husband. The journey itself was an omen, fraught with storms and delays. But when she finally arrived and laid eyes on Philip, the chemistry was instantaneous and explosive. The story goes that they were so immediately taken with each other that they demanded a priest be found at once to marry them on the spot, forgoing all the planned pageantry so they could consummate their union without delay. This was not the cold, calculated alliance her parents had envisioned. This was a torrent of passion. In the beginning, it was a love story. Joanna, far from her stern Spanish homeland, was utterly besotted with her charming husband. She fell deeply, obsessively in love. The Burgundian court was a world away from the austerity of Spain. It was a place of lavish parties, tournaments, and a far more relaxed moral code. And at its center was Philip, a man who basked in adoration and had no intention of being tied down to one woman, even if she was the daughter of the most powerful monarchs in Christendom. Philip was a serial philanderer, and Joanna, whose love was as intense as her piety, could not bear it. Her melancholy deepened, turning into a possessive, all-consuming jealousy. We have to try and see it from her perspective. She was in a foreign land, surrounded by a culture she didn't fully understand. Her one anchor, the man she adored, was constantly betraying her. Her reactions, seen through the lens of a court that already viewed her Spanish intensity as strange, were labeled as hysterical and unstable. She would fly into rages, confront Philip, and cause public scenes. Her love was a desperate, grasping thing, and the more she tried to hold on to him, the more he seemed to slip away. Then a series of tragedies changed everything. In 1497, her only brother and the heir to the Spanish thrones, John, died. The following year, her elder sister Isabella, Queen of Portugal, died in childbirth. Isabella's young son, Miguel, became the heir, but he too died in 1500. Suddenly, through a cruel twist of fate, Joanna, the third child, was now the heiress of Castile and Aragon. She was no longer just the wife of a duke, she was the future ruler of a burgeoning global empire. This dramatically shifted the balance of power. Philip, her handsome, feckless husband, was now positioned to become a king, and her father, Ferdinand, saw the control of Castile, his late wife's much larger and wealthier kingdom potentially slipping into the hands of a flighty foreign son-in-law. The political stage was set for a devastating power struggle, with Joanna trapped in the middle. In 1502, Joanna and Philip traveled to Spain to be recognized as heirs by the Castilian Cortes. The Spanish nobles were not impressed with Philip. They found him arrogant and disrespectful, and they found Joanna's behavior increasingly erratic. She was pregnant and prone to fits of despair, refusing to attend festivities and locking herself away. Was this postpartum depression? A recognized medical condition today, but completely misunderstood then. Was it the strain of her failing marriage and the immense pressure of her new role? Or was it? As her husband and father were beginning to whisper, a sign of the madness inherited from her maternal grandmother, Isabella of Portugal, who had also suffered from deep melancholy. The first clear move to sideline her came from Philip himself. After they were formally recognized as heirs, he was eager to return to his comfortable life and mistresses in Flanders. Joanna, heavily pregnant, was expected to stay behind in Spain. She was distraught at the thought of being separated from him, and her protests were loud and desperate. She was effectively held prisoner in the castle of La Motta, her pleas to be allowed to join her husband ignored. It was during this period that her behavior became more alarming, or at least was reported as such. She would rage, refuse to eat, and spend her nights staring out of the window waiting for him. It was a desperate cry for freedom and for the man she loved, but it was easily framed as insanity. Eventually, she was allowed to return to Flanders in 1504, but the reunion was not a happy one. She found Philip openly doting on a new mistress, and this is where we come to one of the most infamous and perhaps apocryphal tales of Joanna's life. The story, likely exaggerated by her enemies, claims that Joanna, discovering Philip with a lady in waiting, flew into a jealous fury. She didn't just scream or rage. The legend says she grabbed a pair of scissors and attacked the woman, cutting off her hair and slashing her face. Is it true? We can't be certain. The accounts come from sources hostile to her. But even if it is, imagine the context. A young woman, thousands of miles from home, repeatedly betrayed by her husband, suffering from what was likely severe depression. Finally, snaps. It's a moment of human desperation, but in the hands of her political rivals, it became Exhibit A in the case for her madness. A far more significant event occurred shortly after her return to Flanders. In November 1504, her mother, the great Queen Isabella of Castile, died. Isabella's will was explicit. Joanna was to inherit the crown of Castile as Queen Regnant. She was to be the ruler. Her father, Ferdinand, would lose his title as King of Castile and was only to act as a temporary administrator in Joanna's absence. Isabella knew her daughter, and she knew the men around her. She included a crucial clause in her will. If Joanna was unwilling or unable to rule, Ferdinand should act as regent until Joanna's eldest son, Charles, came of age. That little phrase, unable to rule, was the weapon her husband and her father needed. It was the legal loophole through which they could drive a wedge and seize power. Philip had no intention of being a mere prince consort. He began to mint coins with his own image and style himself as King Philip I of Castile. He and his father-in-law Ferdinand became bitter rivals, both claiming the right to rule in Joanna's name. They both used the same justification, that Joanna was mentally unfit. Think of the sheer, soul-crushing betrayal. The two most powerful men in her life, her husband and her father, were now actively working to declare her insane for their own political gain. They circulated letters and reports to the courts of Europe detailing her erratic behavior. Every emotional outburst, every moment of despair was twisted and magnified, used as evidence to strip her of her birthright. In 1506, Joanna and Philip sailed for Spain to claim her crown. Ferdinand initially tried to block their landing, but eventually was forced to negotiate. The result was the Treaty of Villa-Fay-Filla. In this document, Ferdinand agreed to retire to his own kingdom of Aragon and relinquish control of Castile. But a second, secret treaty was also signed between Philip and Ferdinand. In it, they formally agreed that Joanna was mentally incapable of ruling due to her infirmities and passions, and that she should be excluded from government. Philip would rule alone. They had her sign the first treaty, which secured her rights, but then betrayed her with the second. She was now Queen of Castile in name, but a prisoner of her own husband in reality. Joanna was queen, but Philip held all the power. Her reign, however, would be brutally short. Just a few months later, in September 1506, after drinking a glass of cold water after a game of pelota, the hale and hearty 28-year-old Philip fell violently ill. Within days, he was dead. The cause was likely typhoid fever, but rumors of poison immediately swirled, many pointing a finger at his father-in-law, Ferdinand. And this is where Joanna's story descends into the heart of the legend of La Loca. Her reaction to Philip's death was not one of quiet sorrow. It was a cataclysmic eruption of grief. For a time, she seemed completely paralyzed, refusing to eat or sleep, simply sitting by his body. When the time came for his burial, she intervened. She had his body embalmed and placed in a lead-lined coffin, and then she began one of the most bizarre processions in royal history. Joanna, heavily pregnant with their sixth child, refused to allow Philip's body to be interred. She insisted on taking him to the royal crypt in Granada, the final resting place of her mother, Isabella, for 8 long months through the harsh Castilian winter. A strange, mournful procession snaked its way across the country. It was led by the Queen, dressed in black, her face a mask of grief. The coffin of her dead husband followed, carried by nobles. The procession traveled only at night because Joanna reportedly said, "A widow who has lost the son of her own soul should not be seen in the light of day." She ordered that no woman be allowed near the coffin, her jealousy of Philip extending even beyond his death. At every stop, she would have the coffin opened so she could look upon his face, caress his feet, and ensure he was still there. This is the image that has defined her. It's undeniably macabre. It's behavior that seems, on the surface, profoundly disturbed. But again, let's peel back the layers. Her grief was undoubtedly immense and genuine. Her obsessive love for Philip had been the central defining force of her adult life, and now it was gone. She was also in a deeply precarious political position. As long as she had physical possession of her husband's body, she retained a certain kind of authority. His body was a symbol of the legitimacy of their children, especially her son Charles, the heir. Perhaps she feared that if she buried him, her enemies, namely her returning father, would declare her fully insane and lock her away for good. Her vigil was not just an act of grief. It may also have been a desperate political act, a way of clinging to the last vestiges of her power and protecting her children's inheritance. But it didn't work. The procession and her refusal to conduct state business gave her father, Ferdinand, all the ammunition he needed. He returned to Castile not as a regent, but as a savior rescuing the kingdom from a mad queen. In 1509, he met his daughter's procession. With false kindness and gentle words, he convinced her to stop at the small town of Tordesillas near Valladolid. He told her it would be a temporary resting place. It was a lie. Joanna entered the royal palace of Tordesillas as a queen. She would not leave for 46 years. She was 29 years old. Ferdinand confined her to the palace, which was effectively a prison. Her youngest daughter, Catherine, born after Philip's death, was kept with her less as a companion and more as a warden. The governor of the castle was ordered to report on her mental state, and it's no surprise that his reports always painted a picture of instability, justifying her continued confinement. Ferdinand ruled Castile as regent in her name until his own death in 1516. In his will, he did not free his daughter. Instead, he passed the regency on to Joanna's own son, the 16-year-old Charles. When Charles arrived in Spain from Flanders in 1517, he was a stranger to his mother. He visited her at Tordesillas, but it was not a reunion of a loving son and a long-lost mother. It was a cold political assessment. Charles saw that his mother, though perhaps eccentric and depressed after years of isolation, was not the raving lunatic he had been told about. He saw that if she were freed, she could become a rallying point for nobles who were resentful of his foreign, Flemish upbringing, and so the son made the same cruel calculation as the father and the husband before him. He confirmed her imprisonment. He kept her locked away, signing all documents as Joanna and I, the king, using her name to legitimize his rule while denying her any freedom or power. For decades, Joanna languished in Tordesillas. She was the rightful queen, but a forgotten one. Her world shrank to a few dark rooms and the company of the jailers her son appointed. But history wasn't quite finished with her. In 1520, a major uprising known as the Revolt of the Comuneros broke out in Castile. The rebels were protesting the heavy taxes and foreign influence of King Charles, now also Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V. They needed a symbol of true Castilian legitimacy to rally behind, and they found one in the forgotten queen. The rebels marched on Tordesillas and captured the town. They entered the palace and came before Joanna, a woman now in her 40s who had not been part of the world for over a decade. They knelt before her and told her they were there to free her and restore her to her rightful throne. This was her one great chance. All she had to do was sign a document supporting them, and she could have had her revenge on the son who kept her imprisoned. But she refused. Why? Was it a moment of ultimate lucidity? A sense of royal duty that forbade her from siding with rebels against her own son, the king? Was it loyalty to the memory of her father? Or was it the paralysis of a woman so broken by decades of confinement that she was incapable of making such a monumental decision? We will never know. But her refusal doomed the revolt. Charles's forces eventually crushed the rebellion, and his mother's brief taste of freedom was over. He tightened his grip, ensuring she would never again be a threat. Joanna remained in Tordesillas for another 35 years. Her mental and physical health deteriorated in the bleak conditions. Her daughter, Catherine, was eventually married off, leaving her completely alone. The reports from her final years are heartbreaking. She became increasingly devout, but also paranoid, convinced that the nuns who cared for her were trying to kill her. She would refuse to eat, to wash, or to change her clothes. The woman who had been a gifted princess, fluent in 4 languages, who had been a passionate wife and the rightful queen of a vast empire, was reduced to a frightened, neglected old woman in a dark room. She died in April 1555 at the age of 75, having been a prisoner for 46 years. She outlived her parents, her husband, her siblings, and most of her enemies. But she never regained her freedom or her crown. So we are left with the question that hangs over her entire life: was Joanna mad, perhaps? She may well have suffered from a clinical mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, exacerbated by the immense stresses of her life. The string of family deaths, the trauma of a deeply unhealthy and abusive marriage, the pressures of her royal duties, and the possibility of postpartum depression could have combined to trigger a latent condition. But to leave it, there is to miss the point. Whether she had a clinical illness or not, her madness was, without question, the most convenient political tool for the men around her. Her husband, Philip, used it to usurp her power. Her father, Ferdinand, used it to reclaim a kingdom, and her son, Charles, used it to secure his own inheritance. They took her human suffering, her grief, her jealousy, her despair, and they weaponized it. They crafted a narrative, the narrative of Juana la Loca, because the story of a mad queen was so much more useful than the reality of a betrayed one. They needed her to be mad. The truth is likely somewhere in the complex grey space between the 2 extremes. She was not a one-dimensional madwoman, nor was she a perfectly stable victim. She was a deeply human woman, flawed and passionate, placed in an impossible situation. She loved too much, she grieved too deeply, and her emotions were used to condemn her. Her story is a chilling reminder of how easily a woman's voice, especially a powerful woman's voice, can be silenced. Her emotions were deemed passions and infirmities, proof of her inability to rule in a world governed by men. The tragedy of Joanna is not just that she lost her crown, but that she lost her very identity. She was forced into a role written for her by her oppressors, and she has been playing that part on the stage of history for 500 years. It is time we look past the caricature and see the woman behind the legend. Joanna of Castile, princess, wife, mother, and for a brief, shining moment, a queen before her world was stolen from her. Her echo is not one of madness, but of a profound and terrible sorrow.